Christie. Governor, welcome back. It's good to have you again.
Happy to be back, Hugh.
Have you spoken with the president since Wednesday's events?
I have not.
All right. Uh, a very tough first question, Governor. You were the first of the major Republican contenders in 2016 to endorse the president. Do you regret that decision?
I do not, Hugh. I do not because I knew when I dropped out of that race and then after the South Carolina primary that none of the other people on that stage were going to beat Donald Trump. He was going to be the Republican nominee, and I was completely committed, in fact, in some ways desperate, to make sure that Hillary Clinton was not the next president of the United States. And when you look at the tax cuts, the regulation cuts, most importantly, the judicial nominees, the problem is that the president's behavior at times has obscured his accomplishments. But there have been a number of very important conservative accomplishments during his time that would not have happened if Hillary Clinton had been president. So I don't have any regrets.
Oh, I agree. The JCPOA and the Abraham Accords, there's a great list. Will that now always have appended to it, as Nixon has resignation appended to him, the riot and insurrection of Wednesday?
Of course it will. That was a scene and a set of actions that really, I think, shook the American people. And those images, I don't think will ever leave anyone who was watching them. And so it will always be part of the legacy of Donald Trump, if not the first paragraph.
Your assessment of the president's intention on Wednesday and his culpability for the insurrectionists, the riot, and now we know murder of a police officer inside of the Capitol, as well as the death of four, one by shooting.
Well, I don't believe the president intended for what happened to happen. But I think, as has happened for all of the 8 weeks, Hugh, since the election, the president put first and foremost his perception that this election was stolen from him, and his personal grievances were put first, and he used them on Wednesday to fire up that crowd. As he'd been firing up that crowd remotely for 8 weeks with the allegations that the election had been stolen when there really is no solid evidence that the election had been stolen. And so I think that, do I think he went on that stage and Don Jr. and Rudy Giuliani thinking that what was going to happen afterwards would happen? No. But I do think it was foreseeable that you could fire up a crowd enough that things would happen that you couldn't anticipate. And we expect more from someone who holds that office than the conduct over the last 8 weeks, Hugh. The last 8 weeks has been just unacceptable.
Now, Governor, you are a prosecutor. I served time in the Department of Justice as a staff member, but not as a prosecutor. Are all of those rioters inside the Capitol now exposed to felony murder with the death of a police officer?
Potentially, yes. I don't think the Justice Department would do that. I think they'd want to see some type of nexus between where they were, what they were doing, and the death of this particular officer. But if you're talking about it as kind of a law school exercise, Hugh, that potential is there. But I think as a practical matter, you'd want to see some type of nexus between the conduct of the individual person, rioter you were talking about, and the injuries sustained by that police officer, which ultimately resulted in his death.
Will the president face civil liability from the family of the dead officer?
Very well could, and I think this is one of the things that overall the president hasn't really thought too much about is that issue, and I think that that could also apply to Don Jr. and to Mayor Giuliani.
That's what I think, and I don't know that anyone has really thought that through yet. There is talk of impeachment. I think that is a terrible idea for the future of the Constitution and the country. A rushed impeachment would be like the Roman Revolution, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it would be a bad idea, Hugh. With 12 days remaining, I think the idea of impeachment or removal by the 25th Amendment is a bad idea. What I said the other night on ABC when we were covering all these events was that the commission's members, the staff at the White House who remain, and the members of the cabinet who remain, they took an oath too to protect and defend the Constitution. And I think they're heightened, if they stay, their heightened responsibility is to make sure that if the president asks them to do something that they believe is violent of that oath, to sound the alarms immediately. And I think they have a heightened obligation. They always have an obligation to do that. But after the events of this past week, they have a heightened obligation to do that over these final 12 days. And I think if they do, then the idea that it's necessary to remove, the president in any way in the last 12 days is obviated.
Now, I would like to talk to you about the RNC briefly, Governor Christie. Ronna McDaniel is likely to be reelected today as chairman of the RNC. She is not opposed, but there is a co-chair, Tommy Hicks, strong ally of the president and his family, who is opposed. What is your recommendation of the 168 members of the Republican National Committee about both offices?
We have people down there from New Jersey who are part. Two of the three of them, at least, were people that I put on the Republican National Committee to represent the state when I was governor, and they've remained. Bill Palatucci and Virginia Haynes, and I have good faith in both of them to make that decision. They're the ones that are much closer to it than I am. I've never met Mr. Hicks. I of course know Ronna, but I think I'd leave it up to those guys to make that call.
Now, Governor, the Lincoln Project Stephen Schmidt is planning, according to the Wall Street Journal, quote, a brutal campaign, close quote, against companies, trade associations, CEOs, and others that, quote, serve as financiers of the authoritarian movement that attacked the U.S. Capitol. It's a time for choosing. It's America or autocracy. There's going to be a public discussion about it. I remind people Stephen Schmidt was John McCain's campaign manager, responsible for the selection of Sarah Palin, and has been a consistent critic of Donald Trump for 6 years. What's your response to Stephen Schmidt and the Lincoln Project?
Well, I think all it is a vehicle to make money for all those folks who are connected to the Lincoln Project, whether it's Steve Schmidt or Rick Wilson or any of those folks. And the fact is that's what it is. It's nothing more than that. And for them to be out there saying and doing those things, and let's remember, Stephen Schmidt has not been a consistent critic of the president. If you remember my book, Hugh, I note in my book that when Corey Lewandowski was fired, the first campaign manager of Donald Trump, and there was an opening for that in that job, Steve Schmidt asked me to set up an interview for him with Donald Trump, an interview which he participated in. So at that time, he was not such a consistent moral voice against Donald Trump. In fact, he wanted the job. So we need to keep all that in mind.
I had forgotten that, Governor. Now, I'd like to ask you a broad question. Since 2015 and that series of debates in which you and I both participated, the campaign, the endless cable coverage of the president, the histrionics on every cable channel, the TDS enraged pundits, the absolute apologists for the president. Some people never criticize him. Some people never say a good word about him. There's a cycle, an iteration of outrage followed by outrage that has led to polarization. How do we get out of this?
Well, I think part of it is how we conduct ourselves in public life, Hugh. And I think that the president, has helped to contribute to the cycle and has given at times excuse, not valid excuse, but excuse to elements of the media to continue to do that. And I think that we have to be able to talk about the issues that we care deeply about, stick to our message, which, by the way, I think is very popular with the American people in some, and stop the craziness and stop the bad behavior. And I think that will be incredibly helpful to try to stop the cycle.
Now, you do a lot of TV on ABC. I do a lot of TV on NBC, and I do radio every day. Does the public discourse allow for a serious conversation about anything, anywhere?
Yes, it does, and I think that we cannot give in, never give in to the idea that we can have serious discussion. But Hugh, everybody who participates in this has an obligation to contribute to it if they want there to be serious conversation. And so, for folks like you in the media, you have an obligation to do that. For folks like me who come on your show, who operate in the political world, we have an obligation to contribute to it. We're never going to be perfect, Hugh. Me, you, or anybody else is never going to do everything exactly right. But we need to get away from what we've been doing over the last 5 years, which is to encourage and, in fact, reward behavior that diminishes the ability to have a serious conversation rather than enhances it.
Three last questions. Joe Biden insinuated yesterday that demonstrators would have been treated. He didn't insinuate. He stated that demonstrators would have been treated differently if they were black. What's your assessment of that?
This is the type of conversation in the country that we just talked about before, which doesn't contribute to really a good discussion about anything. In fact, what it does is contribute to the diminution of our public life. I wholly disagree with it. I think that what happened, we'll find out when there's a full investigation, but I think what happened, Hugh, was that they just never expected that those folks would come up to Capitol Hill and do anything but march around and peacefully protest. And there not been any indication that that would happen before. They obviously made an error in judgment, but I don't think that error was based on race.
Penultimate question. Josh Hawley's book was canceled by Simon & Schuster yesterday. Your assessment of that?
Well, listen, Simon & Schuster's allowed to make whatever decisions they want to make, and Senator Hawley made the decisions he made. And I think that, when he looks back on it, taking the politically expedient course probably wasn't something that served him or his constituents well.
All right, a lighthearted question. If you were the U.S. Attorney in Manhattan, would you prosecute the Mets for theft of the Indians' greatest player and fine starting pitcher in exchange for four people I've never heard of?
Hugh, I thought that I was going to get that question from you. I just thought I was going to get it earlier. No, I would not prosecute the Mets. That would be an absolute miscarriage of justice. Ahmed Rosario and Andres Jimenez are good young players. You're going to like Jimenez in particular. And let me tell you the guy to keep your eye on in that group, Isaiah Green. Isaiah Green, I believe, will be a major league outfielder for the Cleveland Indians within 3 years.
Let me tell you, Governor, I know you're a Mets hardcore. Frankie Lindor is the greatest thing to happen to baseball in 10 years. And now that he's on the big stage, I hope Cohen signs him for 10 more years so that he can actually define the game for a new generation of Americans.
I'll tell you something, Hugh. There is a lot of excitement in the Christie household starting yesterday. To have the opportunity now to every day watch Frankie Lindor, we are very excited as Met fans in this house.
Governor, thank you.